This message comes from Sony Pictures Classics with Eleanor the Great. June Squibb shines in Scarlett Johansson's directorial debut, a moving, funny, and unexpected tale about truth, loss, and second chances. Eleanor the Great, only in theaters September 26th.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. I grew up in a family where we weren't exactly shy about bathroom talk. Sorry, Mom and Dad. Regularity, quality, and any issues that arise were things I felt really comfortable talking about. But I do remember going to friends' houses where poop talk was a big no-no. And as I grew up, I noticed that culturally, many people never had a chance to grow their understanding of this essential bodily function, how it works, what it does to keep us healthy, and what to do when something feels off. And that's creating huge problems in our society.
Somebody born in 1990 now has quadrupled the risk of developing rectal cancer and over double the risk of developing colon cancer compared to somebody who was born in 1950.
That's Dr. Kimmy Ng, co-director of the Colon and Rectal Cancer Center at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, Massachusetts.
I can tell you it's a really complex thing to study. And while it's been put out there that obesity and sedentary lifestyles are linked to why this is happening, I can also tell you that most of my young patients who I care for in clinic are actually not obese, and they're very active and they lead very healthy lifestyles. So there's likely something else going on.
Colorectal cancer is deadly, and diagnoses are ticking up. 1 in 25 people are at risk of developing it, and now 20% of diagnoses are for people under 50. So why aren't we talking about it?
It is actually the third most common cancer in men and women, and if you combine men and women together, it is the second leading cause of cancer death, trailing behind lung cancer only. And if you look at people under the age of 50, colorectal cancer is actually the leading cause of cancer-related death in men under the age of 50. And by the year 2030, which is not that far away, it is expected to surpass breast cancer to also become the leading cause of cancer death in young women. So this is a huge problem. And correspondingly, no one is talking about it as much as some of these other cancers.
Today, I'm sitting down with Dr. Ng and writer and editor Lori Abraham, who wrote a piece for The Cut about navigating her own colon cancer diagnosis. I want to know how this issue has gone under the radar and what steps everyday people can take to save lives. Okay, so I've seen more discussion of colorectal cancer in the press recently, and that's because more people are being diagnosed with it. What's behind this increase? Like, do we know? Kimmy, tell us.
So ever since the mid-1990s, we have seen about a 2 to 3% increase in both colon and rectal cancers in people under the age of 50. And the reasons are quite unknown at this moment, although we have some clues. And the clues point to environmental factors being the likely culprit behind the rising trends.
Environmental factors. What do you mean by that?
So if you look at the trends, they follow what we call a birth cohort effect, where the increase is really varying and traveling by generation.
Oh.
Yeah. So when we see a pattern like this, it really suggests that there's some recent environmental exposure that's likely accounting for these changes. And by environmental exposures, we are looking at things like diet, like lifestyle, and even some novel environmental toxins and pollutants.
Like microplastics or something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot out there about microplastics right now. There's very little known about what they're doing, but it is conceivable that they may have some role to play in why this is happening.
Oh, so it sounds like there's a few possibilities that are being explored, but not really like a concrete cause that can be pointed to.
Not right now, but I hope we will have some better answers soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to hear, but also, gosh, I imagine that so much of medicine is like this. I will say, though, I've also seen more coverage about this in pop culture, like especially after the death of actor Chadwick Boseman, who was 43 when he passed away. But I also understand that there's some very deep cultural reasons it can be hard to talk about colon cancer. Lori, what was that like for you?
Well, I wasn't really aware of it completely at first, but I started realizing some of the thoughts that would jump into my head when I told people I had colon cancer. I had this image of people seeing me like sitting on the toilet when I said I had colon cancer. It brought up a lot of my discomfort around things scatological. So one of the things I did in the piece was I tried to look into that more. And I write about how the medical profession and support groups, even American Cancer Society, when they talked about colon cancer, they always called it just that rather than colorectal cancer, even though 30% of cases are rectal, because there was such aversion to that word. And they thought, well, if we don't say it, then maybe people will be more amenable to prevention messages. But it got to the point where people were calling the American Cancer Society. I'm looking at your website. It says colon cancer. Does that apply to me? I have rectal cancer.
So it's like they couldn't even see themselves in the messaging because of this kind of marketing strategy that they were trying out.
Yeah, it's not their fault, anyone's fault. It's just these really deep-seated feelings and aversions.
When you talk about the discrepancy between funding for breast cancer and colon cancer or colorectal cancer, can you kind of lay that out for the listener? The statistics that you shared in your piece were pretty staggering.
So colon cancer, it's deadlier than breast cancer, partly because there's been money put into treatments that have gotten better and better. Breast cancer is funded at about twice the rate of colorectal cancer.
Wow.
Cultural messages affect funding.
Okay, so yeah, you raised the point about these kind of like deep-seated cultural messages that we all kind of live with, at least here in America. And I think that people don't like talking about that part of the body and what it makes. And it might even make them embarrassed to talk about their symptoms. Kimmy, have you seen a sort of shame or embarrassment around colorectal cancer among your patients?
Absolutely. There is this component of being embarrassed by the symptoms that commonly happen when a diagnosis of colorectal cancer is made. Just for your reference, the most common symptom, especially for younger people being diagnosed, is having blood in the stool or having a change in your bowel habits or a change in the caliber of your stool so that they're now pencil thin, for example. And these are very uncomfortable topics to talk about, so much so that people sometimes don't even tell their family members, and people don't necessarily bring it up to their primary care providers or the doctors who they are seeing. And this leads to significant delays in diagnosis, especially for younger people, because they're not talking about these symptoms or they're attributing them to something else.
Something else, yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes, Lori, you also wrote about how gender gets wrapped up in this. Like, can you say more about that?
Well, I was just talking about how it somehow seemed unfeminine to have the disease, and I had to sort of pull that apart. I thought maybe it was just because everyone I knew who had cancer, women, had breast cancer. And in truth, as Dr. Eng probably knows, for a long time in medicine, this disease is, and still casually may be referred to as an old white men's disease. The gender discrepancy in who gets it isn't that large. Slightly more men do get it than women, but it's not a big difference. But somehow it's seen as a disease of aging. And it is. There's been this rise in younger generations. Still, people who are most likely to get it are older generations.
Gosh. You know, I see where y'all are coming from in talking about like, and especially like why people would assume that colorectal cancer is like kind of like an old man's disease. But I also think that anecdotally, a lot of men are uncomfortable with their own butts. Like one study showed that men who prize being strong as 54% less likely to complete a screening for colorectal cancer. And there are now other tests, you know, than colonoscopies. There's other ways to detect colorectal cancer than colonoscopies, but some men still might not be comfortable with thinking about that place on their body. Kimmy, have you run into that as well?
we have seen that as well. And it certainly affects certain cultures more than others too. I think the other behavioral thing that has been noted is that a lot of men don't see primary care doctors as regularly and perhaps don't go to the doctor for their symptoms as regularly. So I think that plays into it as well.
There's obviously a taboo around talking about colorectal cancer and its symptoms, or even just like poop and butts and digestion in general. How do we start to fix this taboo around colorectal cancer? Like, what's something our listeners could start doing right now?
One of the women I met, a fellow colorectal patient who was a friend of my closest friend, she actually had rectal cancer, and she says, I never call it colorectal cancer or colon cancer. I always call it rectal cancer. I had rectal cancer. One way is just us talking about it a little bit. I don't know beyond that what could quite be done. I don't know if Dr. Eng has ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really difficult problem, and I think will take a long time to fix or improve. But the approach that we have been taking is to try to talk about it in the media as much as possible. And I do think the death of Chadwick Boseman was tragic, but it did spark this national conversation about colorectal cancer, about the disparities in colorectal cancer incidence and mortality, and the importance of screening and how life-saving that can be. I also think to try and address people being uncomfortable bringing up these symptoms to their doctors need to start asking systematically, routinely at every visit, have you seen blood in your stool?
And also, these symptoms, blood in your stool can be a sign of other things too, and like hemorrhoids for one. And a lot of them are very general. You could have abdominal pain, and you really do have to talk about it with your doctor, and probably a little bit over time.
Mm-hmm. I actually think that's so important. And I say all the time, I don't envy the job of urgent care doctors or primary care physicians who are hearing patients come in with these symptoms because they are so nonspecific. And in a young and otherwise healthy person, blood in the stool is more commonly due to hemorrhoids or other benign conditions than cancer. But as you said, it needs to be followed up over time. If the symptoms are not resolving or getting worse, then you really do need to start working it up.
So it sounds like we all just really need to be paying more attention to what our own bodies are doing and how they're feeling and not holding back.
Absolutely. And it's so important to also talk about it with your family. I have had patients where they didn't know another family member had colorectal cancer because it wasn't spoken of.
Whoa, wait. So even someone in the family would have colorectal cancer and not tell other people. And then it maybe someone else's diagnosis, like another family member's diagnosis, would trigger that conversation?
Yes. And until they go asking because they themselves have been diagnosed, they had not heard prior to that this family member had colorectal cancer. And why this is so important is because if you do have a family history of colorectal cancer, you can get screened earlier than the recommended age of 45.
I think it's 10 years before your family member was first diagnosed.
If the family member was a first-degree relative, yes. And that can be life-saving, right? It can prevent a cancer from happening. It could accomplish early detection. It's so important. So knowing the family history is key.
Oh, wow.
And just to know how common this cancer is, I don't know if you would have asked me before I got this, is colorectal a common cancer? I would have been like, yeah, sorta.
Coming up after a quick break.
The steepest rates of rise are actually in people in their 20s and 30s.
Stay with us.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Betterment. Start investing in a better future. Whether it's saving for today or building wealth for tomorrow, Betterment helps people and small businesses put their money to work by automating to make saving simpler, optimizing to make investing smarter, and building innovative technology backed by financial experts. So be invested in yourself. Be invested in your business. Be invested in better with Betterment at Betterment.com. Investing involves risk. Performance not guaranteed. This message comes from Focus Features. Don't miss Focus Features Anemone, starring three-time Academy Award winner Daniel Day-Lewis in his long-awaited return to the big screen. It's the most anticipated performance of the year. Anemone tells the story of two brothers wrestling with their past and the one secret that has kept them apart for decades. Featuring Daniel Day-Lewis, Sean Bean, and Samantha Morton. Anemone, directed by Ronan Day-Lewis. Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent. Only in theaters October 3rd. This message comes from NPR sponsor FX, presenting The Lowdown, starring Ethan Hawke, introducing you to Lee Rabon, a quirky journalist / rare bookstore owner / unofficial truth seeker who is always on the tail of his latest conspiracy. This time, his most recent expose puts him head-to-head with a powerful family that rules Tulsa, meaning only one thing: he must be on to something big. FX's The Lowdown, all new Tuesdays on FX. Stream on Hulu.
Kimmy, you said something earlier about there being disparities with outcomes in terms of colorectal cancer. Could you say more about that?
Yes. So for years now, it has been documented that Blacks have 20% higher incidence of colorectal cancer, and they're 40% more likely to die of colorectal cancer than non-Hispanic whites. And the reasons underlying this are not still completely teased out, and they're likely multifactorial, but a big part of it is likely access to screening and access to high quality care. But interestingly, the rates of young onset colorectal cancer are actually steepest among non-Hispanic whites. So that even though it's increasing in all racial and ethnic demographics, because of this large rise in non-Hispanic whites, some of those disparities are actually narrowing. So it is actually quite complicated, and we don't understand the reasons behind these differences yet.
Wait, so you're saying that there's been a rise in diagnoses of younger non-Hispanic white people with colorectal cancer, but you're saying that even some of those disparities between non-Hispanic white people and Black people are narrowing, even when taking into consideration barriers to access as far as getting a diagnosis in the first place.
Yes.
Wow.
And actually, some of the disparities in mortality rates are also narrowing because of this large increase in younger people getting colorectal cancer, because actually younger people may not survive longer than somebody who is in their 60s or 70s with colorectal cancer. So it may be a more aggressive cancer that happens in these younger people.
Whoa. Wow. That's really troubling. But you know what, though? That makes me think, I know that there are real problems of access, whether it's, like even for people who can talk about it, people who do want to get looked at. Like if they're too young or they don't have a family history, their insurance might not cover a screening if they are insured at all. Even though rates of younger people being diagnosed are rising, it's still hard to be able to get a screening. I also had a mentor who was uninsured. This was probably about, at this point, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I had a mentor who was uninsured and couldn't pay out of pocket for a screening. And he went to the ER with his symptoms, and he never left the hospital because his colon cancer had progressed too far by the time he was seen by a doctor for it. By the time he was diagnosed, he was gone in a matter of weeks. How can we start to address these more structural problems? The ones that lead to the disparities in care, yes. But also even some of what sometimes to me feel like almost ageist barriers to being able to be screened for colorectal cancer.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear about that, but it is unfortunately all too common to have stories like that. They lowered the screening age from age 50 down to 45. And although I do think that that will definitely prevent more cancers and catch cancers earlier in young people under the age of 50, the steepest rates of rise are actually in people in their 20s and 30s who are still not eligible for screening with this new age of 45. But I honestly don't think they're likely to decrease the screening age any further. So that's
Why not?
It's complicated because of cost effectiveness, and there are risks and complications to screening as well. And even though it's rising in young people, if you look at absolute numbers, it's still a relatively low number of people who do get affected. But that being said, we need to do a better job at cancer prevention and screening for people of all ages. And I think the key to that is really doing the research to understand what the risk factors and causes are. And if we can identify the 20 and 30-year-old who is at high risk of developing colorectal cancer young, they can be screened earlier.
Interesting. My gosh, this has been such an illuminating conversation, and you've definitely given me some things to talk with my own doctors about. So I really appreciate this so much. Kimmy, Lori, thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
That was Dr. Kimmy Eng, co-director of the Colon and Rectal Cancer Center at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, Massachusetts, and writer and editor Lori Abraham. You can read her essay titled My Colon at thecut.com. And y'all, I want to share some exciting news with you. Apple Podcasts has named me a creator we love. It's a distinction awarded by Apple to leaders and trailblazers in podcasting. And it came with a super cute photo shoot, if I do say so myself. You can check it out on Apple Podcasts or on my Instagram. Okay, I hate bragging, so enough about me. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Corey Antonio Rose,
Liam McBain.
This episode was edited by
Nina Patak.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
This message comes from Schwab. Everyone has moments when they could have done better, like cutting their own hair or forgetting sunscreen, so now you look like a tomato. Same goes for where you invest. Level up and invest smarter with Schwab. Get market insights, education, and human help when you need it. Learn more at schwab.com.
This message comes from Homes.com. The right agent can make or break your home search. That's why Homes.com provides an agent directory that details each agent's experience, so you can find the right one and ultimately the right home. Homes.com. We've done your homework. Support for NPR and the following message come from Boll & Branch. Turn your bed into a sanctuary this fall with their buttery, breathable bedding. Enjoy 15% off your first set of sheets at BOLL and branch.com with code NPR. Exclusions apply.